It is Thursday, week 14 of our post COVID world. And on Thursdays, we've been talking about addiction and all things related to addiction. So today, joining me for this conversation about addiction and about telehealth and about looking at addiction from a really interesting perspective that often gets overlooked or is underrated, and more people need to know about it, is Danielle Porto. And Danielle is a licensed clinical social worker. One of her areas of expertise and specialty is the area of addiction, and particularly working in as a real psychotherapist. So I think it probably is helpful, Danielle, to start out um, helping people understand what it is you do exactly and how that might be different from other forms of therapy. And
Mm-hmm.
then and then we can get into looking at addiction from this really interesting framework that to me is extremely helpful in working with addicts and supporting people in their recovery and understanding what this thing is all about.
Okay. Like, how much time do we have?
Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
no, just kidding. And warning that I feel like you and I could go on for days,
We can.
24-hour block, but we will not. We will not. I'll keep it concise. So, what is it that I do? Yeah. So, I'm a relational psychodynamic psychotherapist, is what I would say. A real psychotherapist that also works practically, pragmatically, tangibly with what's going on in your life. So I think when you use those words like psychodynamic, psychotherapy, people are like, oh God, we're just going to be in our heads. Like, how will this actually translate to me accomplishing my goals? What does it even mean? And I think I'll go forward and then we'll go back because the foundation of what I do lives in the realm of honoring connection as a basic need, as essential as water and food, which is a very inconvenient truth for this time of life, given the pandemic, but also just create and buffer our exposure to other people. It's become a very scary thing to think of actually being connected to somebody. And when I say connected, I don't mean the amount of words you verbally exchange. I mean, like sitting with someone, present, feeling seen, feeling heard, being with them. It's a complete, I may say that it's already, you're like complete overload. I want nothing to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that fit with what I do? I work on the understanding of the end goal is to help that become less intimidating, for you to have more confidence in your ability to connect, sustain the unpredictability of connection without imploding, self-sabotaging the relationship, fleeing the relationship, and also eventually have satisfaction from those relationships. The part of my work that I call relational is bringing what's outside of the room into the room. And again, this is like, I think when you first hear it, it sounds cringeworthy. You're like, I don't sit with anybody and I'm going to sit with a therapist and she's going to talk to me or she's going to ask me to talk about what I feel towards her. Ew.
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning, it can feel that way. But so an example is, Betty comes in and is talking about how Susie was such a jerk and completely dismissed her, and she feels minimized and she feels unheard and she's furious. And so we'll process and explore what happened in that interaction. And then another question might be, well, how am I missing you? What misses have I had in our room? When have you felt minimized by me? Um, and I know that seems unrelated, but if we can take that interaction outside and move it inside in a therapeutic setting where I can help you understand my reaction, my interaction, my part of it, and you can really understand in depth your piece, then you can take all those skills and move them back outside and help fix those kind of relationships. So I know that's a long way of kind of exploring, but that's what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Another big piece of it is just making sure your values and what we know about your values align with the actions and the way you're behaving out there, and just continuing to keep you self-accountable. I'm not holding you accountable, helping you stay self-accountable to those core beliefs.
Okay, so, and those are two absolutely critical components of recovery from addiction. And so, one theory that you and I are both trained in understanding addiction is that it begins really with a rupture or with strife or in our reaction to other human beings. So that early on, and way before we even have language, we might feel particularly stressed out in our very infantile way around people. They may not be meeting our needs in the way that we need. They may be basically introducing more cortisol in our bodies or more stress hormone in our bodies early on in life. And what that means then is, as we go through life, the area that we struggle early on is with interpersonal relationships. So it's almost like people become the source of anxiety. People are the place, that place, like you mentioned, where we need connection, like we need air. It's such a critical part of our biology, of our survival, of our evolution. And yet that becomes this main source of anxiety. And so having to figure out how to navigate that is very difficult. And often substances work beautifully in that dynamic, right? So I go to a party, I go right to the bar, do 2 shots tequila, and suddenly I am the perfect version of myself and I feel great. And now I can go be with people. And that's sort of like the one theory or premise of how addiction can develop, or why people that go on to have addictions are at such a higher risk for addiction, because they have that interpersonal anxiety piece.
Completely.
So learning how to navigate that is like this critical piece of the recovery process.
Yeah, and I think too, so just like you're saying, substance use starts off as compensatory, right? It's compensating for the fear and difficulty of navigating the unpredictability of human relationships. And I said it in the beginning, and just check in, whoever's listening, check in with what you thought when I was talking about what I meant by connection. If you started to get panicky in your body, right? Like, one, you have a lot of company. Two, like that's it. That's what we're talking about working on. And so, right. So it starts off as compensatory, and then the more it increases, the more it erodes. Whatever skills you had, relational skills you had, it erodes them. And then you turn back to the substance more to help with the eroding. And then you're just stuck in this nasty growing spiral. There's a kind of phrase that's used to encapsulate all this, but it's whether the cause or the consequence of substance use. By the time someone develops a serious substance use disorder and addiction, their attachments, their relations are impaired. We know that.
Yeah, it's one of the actual ways that that addiction is actually diagnosed, right? Problems in our interpersonal or in our relationships. And I think it's also really interesting that when you start looking at addiction closely from this perspective, it actually, what makes us so at risk for addiction is that part of our brain that's responsible for connection. So if, at childbirth, we get this flooding of oxytocin and dopamine, that we fall so madly in love with our child that's why we will put up with the diapers and the crying and take care of them till they're 30 years old, right?
Because, and do it again.
And do it again and again and again in your case, right? Because we fall so deeply in love. So that's the actual mechanism of action that addiction then goes in and works on, and then kind of takes over, hijacks, so that, like you were saying, when you get to these later stages of addiction, you can't feel the relationship, the primary relationship is with the substance and not human beings.
It's exactly right. But so it leaves us with a situation of like, what do we do with all this? Right. And it goes back to, I started with, so how do I work as a therapist in the room? And much of what I do is informed by so much of what we're saying. But the treatment for all this is building confidence in one's ability to have relationships and building trust in the fact that I can derive satisfaction once those relationships are achieved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And being able, like you were saying, just to even tolerate caring about somebody, tolerate the uncertainty that comes from the unpredictability of human beings.
Exactly.
Which is really, like you said, cringeworthy or incredibly difficult, not just for people with substance use disorders, but certainly for many other people as well. So
for many of us, and we are all having this major social atrophy right now, right? Our social muscles it's like as if we've all had this cast on with the quarantines and the pandemic. And so there is a lot of company for people who need to work on regrowing, reflexing, relearning these skills. It sounds ridiculous because it's like, we're adults, many of us, right? Most of my clients in 20s and 30s, they're adults, but we need to relearn these skills, and we need to continue to learn them and practice them because it's so easy, because of the discomfort for anyone making connection. It's so easy to be the turtle that kind of all turns inward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's really hard, at Mind Movement, we talk about this, what we call the victim mentality, but really what it means is not the way it sounds initially. It means that I look to control my insides with something outside. So, you'll see this in people who get really frustrated by like slow walkers in New York City, or people who, when the traffic lights don't change when they want them to, get overwhelmed with anger because we've come to rely on manipulating the circumstances for certainty. Like that's the way that we're managing our anxiety because that's how we've been taught. So it's like, in order for me to regulate my emotional discomfort, I try to micromanage people, like, get out of there, don't sit there, don't go there, can't you put the toilet seat down when you leave the bathroom, like clean up your clothes, don't, all of that is about trying to control other people so that we can feel less anxious, right? And that's really become the like main skill that people have for controlling anxiety.
What I'm thinking, how many forms do people have to actually practice doing something other than that skill? There's not, outside of a therapeutic setting, there's not really people that sit and talk with you about how they're impacted by what you say and how you say it, and how maybe some of their stuff did pop into the interaction, but this is what they're seeing about your history that may have, right? Like you can't just get that everywhere. And so I know you and I were talking previously, right? So think of this person who's struggling with substance use, or just the person who's struggling with connection. So there's whatever treatment you're doing, that's like the road, paving the road, right? So Mind Movement is the paving of the road. Your 12-step program is the paving of the road. But the road naturally is going to get dinged. It's going to get banged up. Someone's going to come along and be reckless and like really put a nasty pothole in it. And the job of therapy is to be that pothole filler, is so you don't break down, so you don't, heaven forbid, double back and take the next exit off the highway that you just spent years working to lay out. That's how we can be part of the process without overtaking the process, but keeping you on track.
Yeah. So it really, and it works. I mean, it can take longer than maybe we want to sometimes.
Yeah.
But it
Always.
really works, right? Always, exactly, always. But it really works.
You'll laugh because I just had a new client call, and he's setting up a session, and I said, I just want to be straightforward. Like, I see clients once a week. I don't think it's beneficial to go less frequently than that. And he's like, but I could come multiple times. I'm like, yeah, you can come. And he's like, well, I'm just thinking I'll just come like every day you're in the office. I just want to like get this over with. And so it made me laugh, and not but smile in a kind of warmth. But yes, it would be awesome if our defenses worked that way. And we will do as much as we can, as quickly as we can, but it doesn't. Often our defenses interfere. And, when you're sitting in a room and you go blank and you're like, I don't know what happened. I spaced out. You can't always get this stuff done in one clip.
Well, no. And, it's interesting, like people understand that, or at least we've had to, no choice, but to come to accept that with diet and exercise, we know that there's going to be this time, this, effort over time. And
Oh, that's
unfortunately, with
interesting.
mental health, people don't get it. It's the same thing though. Like
Yeah.
mental health is a physical process. It's a physical change in the body. And that's just not how humans are built. Like we're built to change over time. And that's
Yes.
tragically, that's the deal. That's how we're all in it together.
It is tragic. I'll sit with everybody on that. It's tragic.
It's tragic.
It is how it is.
Yeah.
I want to, if I can just put this reminder out there too. We regulate each other as social mammals. We need other people to regulate our systems. And in fact, interactions with other people change our brain chemistry. They rewire, which is like, it's amazing. And it sucks at the same time.
Yeah.
But
yes. Mm-hmm.
You and I kind of harping on all of this is because of just that. We need to figure out ways. We have no choice. We can't decide to boycott water, right? We can't decide we're just not going to eat anymore. It's the same way. We can't just decide to sign up with Connection. You may feel like you can, but there are serious, not just mental health consequences. There are physiological consequences to that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. Well, and, I'm thinking about trauma. So, this is a conversation that we have a lot. We talk about trauma all the time. But really what that means to me is, like you were saying, it's like when, what maybe should be wiring one way for love and connection with other human beings really gets wired the other way, so that it has to be, like you're saying, rewired. We have to be taught and then learn how to do it differently.
Right. And we know that the earlier in life, you see how quickly babies learn things, right? The younger we are, the more plastic is what they say our mind is. Plastic is a term they use for when your mind is able to just retain and develop very, very quickly. And so if at that point you get these faulty relationships or these misattunements or just whatever you want to call them, relational misses, we're almost in adulthood, we're talking about rejiggering the whole system.
Mm-hmm. With less plasticity and,
yeah,
a lot of already established, as you were saying, difficulty and habits that are not helpful. And it's really, this is serious stuff. This is no joke. And addiction is a very serious, complicated illness that is unfortunately very, it's difficult. It's hard to be afflicted with it. It really is. It's also hard for the people around you who love you and don't want, and want you to, right, that they see the best in you. So one other thing that we've been talking about, so we both work with a lot of young adults, and obviously, our younger population has this different way of connecting. So, I didn't have Instagram and Facebook until much later in life. I didn't even have a computer until I was like 24. So, right, but then you have, like, my daughter's on YouTube, right? She's 6. Mm-hmm. So she's like, I want to be, what is it called? A YouTuber, or I want to be like, that's what she wants to be when she grows up. So it's like, right? Okay. But that's this different form of connection. And so now, and we're all feeling it, interestingly, because of COVID, we've had no choice but to start to use things like Zoom and these other forms of ways to connect that we may not have, because, those of us that are a little older just didn't do that in the past. Right. So I'm wondering what your experience is of this younger generation who, how it might be impacting them to, have less need for that, so that face-to-face interaction.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think on the front, so a lot of my practice was already via telehealth before the pandemic because I work with so many college age individuals. So we'd work together while they were at school. We'd do telehealth. They'd come home, we'd meet in person. So it's something I was familiar with. Obviously, when the pandemic started, I didn't know how it was going to go. For clients who were really committed to in person, I was skeptical about whether they would hang on, whether it would feel like enough. I was curious even about my own skills. Part of being a psychodynamic therapist is almost like being an energy reader, right? You're really very quietly listening to what your body is doing, what their body is doing, and can I do that over this? The short answer is yes, crazy enough. But So what has happened has surprised me, because there's right, many 20 and 30 somethings are using these buffers, like I had said, to connect, to make the immediacy of the contact not so big and not so alarming. So I think it was almost too big of an ask when I was doing in person sometimes to say, okay, come and meet me in person, sit 4 feet across from me, look into my eyes and tell me your life story and I will see you, right? It's like, I don't know, thanks, I'm going to go home now. There's something about doing it this way that actually I found the depth of the work that I'm doing with many clients, especially those who we just couldn't quite get the connection right. There was always this like back and forth movement. All of a sudden it's just like we are just going in for it. I think to add to it, Sammy, I think you mentioned this last time we spoke, there's more agency in it. They're not coming into my space. And so this added comfortability really has improved the level of work that we're doing. It's wonderful. I even have this fantasy. So maybe post-COVID, doing these assessments to evaluate, maybe some clients should start via telehealth and move to in-person once they develop the muscle and we develop the rapport. So, and then, like I said, the other thing that surprised me is that I am able to feel with them as intensely, pretty close to as intensely as I would be able to if I was in person. It does come through because there's still a stillness about it and a presence and a quiet about how you're sitting with them. So.
Right. And it's really interesting because one of the basic theories that we have also at Mind Movement that we're always talking about is, I've had clients, for example, who can do a lot of that great repair work in the office and, who learn, like you were saying, to be able to sit and to be able to connect, but then they hit the sidewalk and it's just back to the old wires, back to the old defenses. Yeah. And so one of the things that we've been talking about so much is how do we integrate? How do we take these great relationships that they're building with us and then go out into the world together? And some of that actually might mean maybe not with me, but with one of our coaches or whatever, literally going out into the world and literally talking about what the experience is like and how to work through it, more like exposure work, but not quite as heavy. Now, we're sort of looking at this virtual space as this opportunity to not only do that in the world, but to do that in someone's home, where oftentimes, even though that can be very safe, it also is where, the more reactive thinking can come. So it's safe, but maybe not integrated. And so if we can do that integration work just purely at the brain level, really, in someone's space, like you're saying, maybe that's an even better sort of starting point, or like paving that road, filling in the potholes to then jump off from.
Well, it's funny because you're like seeing, right? So you're seeing them with less dimensions because they're literally on a screen, but you're almost seeing them with more dimensions because you're in their home and their mom and dad are outside their door and you're hearing whatever goes on in the background and who's fighting with who and, how the client slept until just before your appointment. And you maybe didn't know that last time and you see what their room looks like. And they're literally trying to shovel down breakfast while they're on the phone. It is a very, very new way, but I think a refreshing recharge of maybe what needed to be shaken up a little bit.
Yeah, right. I think
sides.
That's kind of what I think the great lesson here has been across the board for everyone. And it's also why I think some of this social justice movement has been, available to us now because, we were all going about our crazy lives and it's very like, we're very obtuse, like we're going to do this and this, and this is what Monday looks like. And this is Tuesday. And we work so hard to build that, like to get to that place where it's like a well-oiled machine, the kids go here then, and this person picks them up and this person, all of that. And then it just stopped. Like the plug just got pulled and all of a sudden it was like, well, how long are we going to be doing this for? There's absolutely no certainty. There's still no certainty. We still really don't know what the hell is going to happen, right? At any moment it can change. Numbers really are not going down outside of, New York. So all of that though, then you kind of go, wait a minute, do I even want to do this? Do I even like what I'm doing? Do I even like this schedule? Do I even want to live here? Like, it opens up the door for all of this new information to come flooding in. And I think that's exactly right, Danielle. I think it's giving all of us, some people never got on a computer until, because they're much older. Now all of a sudden they're doing Zoom meetings, AA on Zoom. And, I think this has a real imprint or impact in ways that are, going to change things for many, many years to come. And I think you're right. Like, therapeutically, we're seeing, hey, maybe we need to keep some of this treatment stuff virtual, and maybe there's a real value to it, in a way we haven't entirely mastered,
Right.
but I think we can work to move towards.
Yeah, and you're reminding me too, like, it's so multi-layered, right? So the other piece of it that I didn't mention that you just referenced is people are more raw, right? They're stripped of all their distracting factors. They have nothing else to think about but the way they interact with the world. They're stuck in it. And then also I wonder, on a very human level, like, I'm more raw. And so I'm not like uncontained as the therapist in my session, but I'm clearly going through the same trauma that they are. And is there something easier? Does it feel a little bit more reciprocal that warms them up enough to show up? I don't know. I wonder a little bit about that, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, we've definitely been talking about that. How unusual is it to have the therapist and the client going through the same experience in the same traumatic way, or the same really big
Yes.
experience at the same time? And it's really funny, Danielle, the people that, and I've noticed this from the beginning, the people that I see in general that are doing the best out of all of us are my clients. They are like the ones who've been the least affected, who's
because their world was already like this.
Exactly.
They already
Exactly. Yep. And they already have tools. They already know how to manage it.
Yes.
So it's like they were the ones who had the least, impact. But while the rest of us, right, we were stripped of all of our coping mechanisms.
I'm thinking like touche, like they got it in the end. Like, yeah, that's where you want to be at this point, right? Like in a place where you have supports, you're already working on all of your ways of relating to the world. Any maladaptive, like you're already in it. Yeah.
You're already in it. Yeah. And so, and you're learning how to, navigate the world anyway. And this is like whatever in the background. When is this going to end?
Because it did. It already felt like this. Yeah, I get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and then, but you made a really interesting point about having to relearn this social dynamics, because I've also seen, regular people, I don't know how else to say it, right? People that, maybe are not, don't have a long history of mental health or addiction, who now are starting to develop sort of like an agoraphobia. Like, they don't want to go outside. They're afraid to go outside, maybe because of COVID masks, or just because now, like you're saying, there's this great awareness or greater level of anxiety that has been activated, that there's no way to contain, or no awareness of how to contain.
Yeah, I think actually, I don't know if this came into the beginning of when we were talking, but I wish you could like post live videos of your dog's emotional state, because I think it would be a reminder of what we're all holding, that we are either pushing under, or maybe we're adequately coping with, but like the raw result of what we're going through. I know people say it over, but really, like, there's trauma embedded in our skin. There's people who will come out of this and will have anxiety disorders that didn't have them, whether it presents as agoraphobia or something else. Like, this was something that felt like and it did. It threatened our survival individually. Each of us, it felt like it threatened our survival. And so that's how it was coded into our body. And yeah, there's real consequences to that we have to address. I have this, and maybe I have this fantasy. I'll start a group, because I'm a certified group psychotherapist and I love groups, but called social resuscitation, right? Coming back to life after COVID. But it's because, for real, it's like we've been locked up and kind of like lulled into this like very small space. And how do we even remember how to express and interact? And
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think it's really, going back to what you said, the first instinct is survive. So the body's like first or
Mm-hmm.
primary drive is survive, but the second is, as you said, connection.
Yeah.
And so it is this primary drive, and it is typically how we heal. So the problem that we then come back to with addiction is the very thing that we need to heal and overcome addiction is the thing that we are struggling with most. And that's what makes the recovery process very difficult, very painful, and very long and arduous. It's also why the 12-step model works so well in for helping people, because if you're able to tolerate the "we'll love you till you love yourself" kind of idea, right? If you can allow
The
people
image
to
of like
hold
being
you,
hugged and just like won't hug
exactly,
back.
that's right, and that's
We'll keep
okay.
hugging
Like,
you.
if you can just sit there and deal with
Yeah.
it, like, for a period of time, many people can, that's okay. But that's sort of why, so much of why it can work for people.
Yeah.
And that's the great challenge. So I love the fact that the work that you're doing, both talking about it from a telehealth perspective, but also directly in that interrelational work, that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is. And the benefits, the results of that kind of work feel like they're exponentiated, right? It
Mhm.
feels like instead of this linear growth and just getting to understand yourself and how your past is playing out in your present,
Mhm.
it like grows like this. I don't know what those toys are that like shrink to little balls and then expand. It's like that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
what's really funny is, at Mind Movement, we believe that the basic premise of any type of psychotherapy or therapeutic work is to build that sense of safety, or to repair our ability to have these, interpersonal relationships, or to have intimate relationships, ideally, over time. But what we were finding, and the reason that we actually broke off and built Mind Movement, was that there were certain clients who we call like treatment resistant, or they were repeat offenders. They were people who were being sent all over the world to find treatments that worked, medication that worked, all of the above, and just couldn't get there. And what we found was that that same population had two things in common. One, the anxiety, they were unable to get past that anxious response to another human being, no matter who they were. They could be the greatest therapist in the world, but they were unraveling, and they were coming in a state of fight or flight. So instead of learning to relax and calm in the presence of another person, they were being activated. And what was really interesting is nobody caught it. So
Hmm.
going in and out of all of these different treatment programs, nobody was able to see that what we were seeing was a hypervigilance. I mean, literally, like, teeth clenched, right? Was
Yeah, no,
this
I can see. Yeah.
response. And so when, and either it was this, or, for some people, it's like, when you can see that someone's so anxious, they're like, um, and so what we decided was, all right, look, if some people in medicine, just for whatever reason, their body doesn't metabolize it well, um, they were not able to get past, to sort of integrate into treatment, to come into a place of easing the anxiety or the anger, whatever it was. Medicine wasn't working, and so what we started doing was movement. We started using modalities or movement like
Mm-hmm.
yoga or gentle movement or things like Feldenkrais, different ways to teach the body how to calm itself down, so that the person could then connect to the therapeutic figure and
Hmm.
start the work of repair. That was
It's
really the
really
whole
amazing.
premise. That was the whole premise of Mind Movement from the beginning.
Well, you think too, like, I don't know if people can visualize if they've ever gone like on a run with somebody or like on a walk and like talked with the person while they're, it's almost like, right? Like things just like fall out of there. Right. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, I picture it similarly. There's just, once the body starts moving, it all just starts coming. Um, it's a wonderful way to,
Mm-hmm.
right, you said, to move this out of fight or flight
Right.
and then eventually move it past that, so it actually becomes like proactive work.
Yes, and that's what
Yeah.
we found. And the other really interesting, and I'd love to do more research on this at some point, the other variable that really seemed to be constant in this treatment resistant group
Mhm.
was kinesthetic learning as their primary way of engaging with the world. So these were people who were like tremendous athletes at one
Mhm.
point, or maybe even Division I level athletics, like
Right.
people who maybe didn't learn best in that like traditional academic
Sit.
way, right?
Yeah.
Couldn't sit, and but who you gave them a football or a soccer ball and they were off to the races. So something about being in these like kind of traditional treatment environments where you are sitting and in groups and chairs,
Mhm.
it was just too activating, and there wasn't any information being retained because they were in a state of activation. And so when we got them moving, it's like the body was like recharged, like, oh, I know how to do this. Like you were saying, it was like, I know how to find the present in the movement. And now my anxiety's cut in half.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly where you want to move them in order to get like treatment going. That is it, right? And so I mean the place where more traditional psychotherapy fits into it is once they're unjammed and they're able to relate and connect again. But I think you're right. Early on, it needs to be whatever it is that gets them back in their body, back in their emotional state, and back in a related state.
Right. And the ability to even be related, you
Yeah, I
know.
think there's this the immediacy of contact is just too much for so many people right now. I mean, think about if you just even think about like your past week and how many times, even if you had something really to say, and maybe even think about with like your partner or like a really close loved one, did you really sit down with them, phones down, like look them in the eye and sit with emotional presence and talk to them? Like, no. I mean, I'm the therapist doing this work, and I can think my last week, and I'm probably like, I don't know if I do that last week. We just don't do it that much anymore. So
Mhm.
it almost doesn't even make sense the gravity of the what you're asking them in the context of what they're coming with. And I do a lot of like relational titration. So I gave the example of whatever, Betty comes in and is mad at Susie, and then I ask this question that's about me, and that's like, oh, it's scary. That's not how it starts off. The beginning of it, really, actually, the beginning of the relational work is about, well, first reminding client. I work with a lot of skeptical clients that are skeptical of therapy, and
Mhm.
then through our work, they end up usually staying around for a while, but becoming long-term clients. But my initial step is they can fire me at any point, right? And almost playing with that, the
Mhm.
social conduct has to become play so it doesn't feel so heavy. And if
Mhm.
instead of ending every session and saying I'll see you next week, I end and say, are we booking another session? Like, would you like to book it, or you want to think about it and just call me in a few days? I mean,
Mhm.
maybe I'll be booked up, but maybe I won't. And the more I can remind them of their agency to come and go, the more they can decide, oh, no, I'm maybe not in such a rush to fire her. I'll fire you in
Mhm.
3 weeks. I'll give you two
Mhm.
more weeks.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then the other part of it is letting them know I can tolerate their negative feelings towards me. The sooner I can do that, the sooner I can like be with them in their skepticism of me, the sooner I can be with them in whatever misses I've had in the beginning. Um, these are the things that make connection hard. If we worry that people can't tolerate when we don't like what
Mhm.
they're saying and who they are, and we worry that we can't leave a relationship, that we'll be roped in, or that we'll have to just like drop it.
Right.
um,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Mhm. Mhm.
those are the crucial points of making this stuff stick and making it worthwhile.
Yeah. And, this is another kind of topic entirely, but having recently in the last 6 months studied romantic relationships and romantic interdynamics and the masculine and the feminine and this whole other world of bringing this dynamic into that, even that space where trust is even more important
Right.
and where the stakes feel even more intense and even higher. And that map is even the wires are even more crossed up, right? Because maybe
Mm-hmm.
we've had relationships in the past that did not go well, and there is this reluctance to want to trust and to really give, like you were saying, oneself to the interaction. When you look at it, like you were saying, it is all so hard for somebody who does have that insecure attachment or who has had a history with addiction, that you can even be sober 20 years and still not have done this work, because it is, like you're saying, it's like kind of a setup. Like, we're asking you to do something that we expect you to be able to do, but that's so hard.
It's such a leap. It's such a far step from where it's so far from where the starting point. It's almost unfair.
Yeah. And that's why I think we lose a lot of people in that starting point. So the people that can go on and tolerate it and, and do well, they receive the benefit of that. But those that never quite get to that, past that beginning point, just keep getting stuck, as you were saying, in the cycle of turning to the only thing that they know they can control, that is consistent, that's reliable, right? Which is the substances, to alleviate those difficult, overwhelming feelings.
But I want to challenge that individual later on, right? So, because this is what we're essentially saying. So therapy is not right for you in the beginning. It's not a fit. It was too much. It was too intense. And, but as you do start to get your feet under you, as you do start to connect in whatever world you are connecting, to maybe revisit it with this newer self, because I wouldn't want them to miss out on. It's like as if Mind Movement's the track team and the therapist is like the athletic trainer, right? Like you need someone on the sidelines that's going to be like, no, we can help repair this and get you back in the game. Like I wouldn't want you to miss out on that, and again, take the next exit on a highway that you put too much work into it. So
and the thing that I'm doing this Ayurveda, Indian medicine, in the middle of this training process, and there's this sentence that just keeps playing over and over. It's one of the Yoga Sutras. It's it starts with, ignorance is the root of all suffering. And you don't know. We're talking about this like everybody just understands it this way, and we have this language that very few people, even those in the realm of treatment, clinicians in the treatment realm, don't have this language too. And so we have this perfect framework to kind of think and then conceptualize and support, but I don't know what I don't have. I don't know what I don't know often. And so I don't know what I'm missing. I don't know that it can be different. And I don't trust that it can be different because I've never seen it. I've never experienced it. And so much of, I think, what perpetuates addiction is that lack of trust that there's going to be anything else that gives me that relief. I cannot, it's too scary. It's too risky. There's no way that I can trust that. So things have to be so bad. Like I have to be so close to my deathbed for some people that I'm willing to even give anything else a chance.
Well, it's only when the pain of the same is greater than the pain of change that change will actually occur, right? We need to be suffering. And this occurs in most areas of life with change. Talking about an area where there's a physiological dependence on top of everything else, right? It's
really hard.
Yeah. And like you said, it's like moving towards the pain. It's the very thing that started you down the road of using substances, this way to compensate for the fear and difficulty of relationships. It's like, wait, get rid of that and turn back to relationships. I mean, it sounds horrific.
It does. And I think it can feel that way. It's totally horrible.
Yeah.
Anything but that. Please, God, I'll do anything but that, right? No, really. I know. Well, and so that is, though, to come full circle, like that is why I think there is a role for this telehealth. There is a role for, learning how to use this as a tool, as a real tool for change for people who otherwise may not make that change or may not have access to the ability to move in that direction. But it can be baby steps. And one of the things that most people don't, the average person's not thinking about addiction treatment all the time, right? So, but addiction treatment is like planting seeds, and you don't know, it takes, they say, 7 years on average to quit smoking. Like you have to keep doing it over and over again, or 7 times.
Yes.
But it's like each time you learn from the last time, or each step you're taking something that's kind of, inside of you, like the seeds have been planted and they start to grow, and every step is a step towards that day when hopefully you are able and you do have the ability to get to that end place, right? So it's all just bringing you towards the hopeful end, which is being able to get into recovery of some kind.
Yeah, and it's like stripping away the layers of defensiveness. And I shouldn't say stripping away because we're not really, but it's like if we say too much the first round, you hear maybe one fragment. I mean, I can envision a time I've been in a defensive place and someone said something to me and I just said, you black out. You're like, I don't know. Or it doesn't compute. It literally doesn't compute. You're like, I heard you say these words. I have no idea what you're saying. Right. And so you try it second round, right? And maybe a little bit more gets in by third, fourth, right? It starts to seep in. But when someone has a serious substance issue or anything where there's defenses surrounding it, it's not within your choice to lower those defenses. Your mind has to feel that you are psychologically prepared to tolerate what you're going to come in contact with. And so I love that that mind movement opens the door, right? It opens the door. It says, let's do this a different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you also just said something that, is also really in the world of psychology, unfortunately, is not necessarily stressed. And so the tragedy is many therapists, we're taught to think on the mental side and the emotional, sort of the thought side, or the emotional side or the behavioral side. We're not taught to link the physiology with the emotional and mental. And so you may not know that having those defenses up literally keeps you from hearing, can't hear.
Mm-hmm.
The information can't go in. It's not it's not an emotional choice. It's a physical, mechanical problem at that point that needs to be addressed primarily before any work is going to happen next.
And I think too, so being much less judgmental of those moments, being why can't I must be daft or something that I can't understand what you're saying. No, that's a sign that something's moving too fast.
Right.
And who's ever on the other side of that, hopefully they're a person who can take, but should know that they're moving too fast. It's great that you're saying something very articulately, but I cannot tolerate what you're saying right now.
Yeah. And I think that's something that we, as the receivers and as the helping professionals, even if you're in any helping profession, sort of need to be aware of too, that, these are the feedback. This is the feedback, these are the things to look out for. And then that's our job, right? Is to take that step back or to look at another way. How else can we get in? Because the way that, I once had a therapist say, but I keep trying to just get them to open up. And if they would just open up, then I could develop the relationship and I could get them to trust me. And I know I could do good work with them. Mm-hmm. And I just, said, but right, that's the whole question. The question is,
right.
How do we get the reaction to stop? Yeah. Right, exactly. Right. How do we get the initial reaction that you're trying to get past? How do we get that to stop? Right. And
it makes me think of I have a client and, it's really funny. So, we've been working together for years now. And if I say something, I get a little wordy sometimes, when I do say something, sometimes I use too many words. And I'll see her kind of glaze over and I'll say, where did you go? She's like, I don't know what you just said. Right. So, okay, what did you last hear? And sometimes it's 2 minutes ago. Mm-hmm. Fronts her defenses too abruptly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. That's what it's like being in a relationship with me. Just too many words, Sam, break it down. What the hell did you just say? Stop. Right?
Yeah. But it's good. In the therapeutic relationship, that's kind of feedback that you need, right? I'm not here to make myself sound good. I'm here to help you. And if me helping you is you tuning out, that's not helpful. So let's go back and let's just forget it. If we went one step too far into this, let's just forget it. Let's go back to where you were, where you needed to be in the interaction.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you said a lot of really helpful and wise things. So really, understanding where our clients are and not trying to force where we are, right? But trying to really understand where they are. And then what is the language that I need to find, in my body or in actual linguistics. When I'm doing training with my mind movement team, we talk about shared language. Can we find a shared language that we can start to use to support the client in moving? Sometimes you have to play with language a little bit to find it, right? But if you can, then you can accelerate the process.
Yeah, and you have to get creative, it's to make sure we're not just too much in a box.
Yeah, absolutely.
Boundaried and creative.
Exactly.
The boundaries make sure everyone, everyone knows that they're safe and we're not going to start doing something insane.
Yes.
But the creativity also shows the flexibility they need, so it doesn't become like punitive and one-dimensional and kind of like my way. We're going to do therapy my way and you need that. How is that going to soften anybody to the process?
Right. No, then that becomes like bad parenting.
Yeah, completely misattuned.
Yeah. Such a great conversation, Danielle. I mean, we could probably talk forever, but this is, it is really helpful.
We could talk forever.
We have done that. We
won't torture anybody.
Totally.
There's like a running live feed where we're just talking still.
That's so true, and we could do it for days. Would be really fun.
Yeah, but seriously, thank you so much for having me. To you and the Mind Movement team, it's just a pleasure being here, and love to chat again whenever it feels like it'd be helpful.
Absolutely, so great to see you, Danielle. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Enjoy your weekend. Be safe. Be well. Stay sane. Enjoy your family.
Thank you, you too.